All right. Welcome back to Overengineered, the podcast where we ask the question, what's the absolute best way to do things we already have a perfectly acceptable solution for? Today, I am here with Joe Tannenbaum. Joe, you want to say hi and introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. My name is Joe Tannenbaum. I'm a software engineer at Digital Extremes. We're a gaming company, and I work on the web team to help support the game.
Nice. And I feel like you have kind of recently been blowing everyone's mind with some crazy command line experiments that have been
Yeah.
really fun to play around with and watch.
It's been fun. It's mostly just been something fun for me to do. I was kind of a little tired of just like the everyday coding stuff, and I stumbled into the mechanism that prompts had on offer, and I was like, well, I think we could push this a little further. I think we could blow this up a little bit. So yeah, it was just fun, and then I started sharing them, and people were into them. So, which was unexpected, because who cares about text-based user interfaces? But I guess somebody does.
Well, I think a lot of people do, and I mean, I don't have exactly like a topic, a thing that we're trying to solve today, and it's more just like, you know, what's the best way to do user interfaces for this type of thing. I'm going to even leave it away from CLIs, but just for like sort of tasks that are either one-off or long-running processes, things that lend
Sure.
themselves to the CLI, because I have some thoughts there. But yeah, I just think it's like this is one of those places where developers just love this stuff. You know,
Yeah.
we love to get in the terminal and mess around with it. And it's so fun. I
And
mean,
there's like a retro vibe to it as well. Like
yeah,
it feels like, you're rewinding the tape like 20 years and seeing what's back in the
absolutely.
terminal. That feels good too.
Yeah. So I just want to take some time to explore that. And I think I'll start with just like my sort of hot take, which is I tend to think, as much as I love command line interfaces, that we overuse CLIs as developers,
Whoa.
and that we're effectively trying to turn them into browsers. And we have this incredible tool called a web browser that already does all the things that the browser does.
Okay.
and
Okay.
and I wonder if like there's definitely the retro, just like the retro fun of command line interfaces. There's also, but I think it's also kind of like we are dealing with the fact that browsers are not good at one thing, which is like a long running process.
Right.
And so if you're running a script that needs to execute over hundreds of thousands or hundreds of millions of database records or something like that, like back in the day, before, I don't know, before folks were, I feel like there was kind of this weird gap where way back when everything was terminal, right?
Right.
And then coming into the 90s and early 2000s, I think a lot of developers were not very confident in the terminal. And we saw a lot of things like, like PHP and like a bunch of
Yeah.
the like all the different
The
PHP
GUI
scripts that
stuff
would
popped
do
up.
like weird hacky things to like run background processes in the browser. WordPress is a great example of that. And then I
Sure.
think coming into the last 10 years, there's been like sort of a resurgence of interest in the command line within like the sort of mainstream developer community. And, probably like whatever Linux for Windows, or that
The
Windows has a
WSL.
better CLI story probably helps.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think like I still wonder though, is it just for fun, or where is it that a CLI interface is better, and when are
Let,
these like cool affordances actually like bringing value versus just for fun? Because there's no reason why we can't just do them for fun. But
sure. Sure. Let's clarify sort of what you're talking about. Are you talking about basic CLI script that's prompting for values and doing something with it? Or are you talking about like a full blown 2E basically, or both.
Yeah, maybe both. I mean, I
Okay.
honestly think that even for like the basic CLI interfaces, the fact that we're trying to recreate like drop downs and autocomplete, and like you were just
Mhm.
talking about trying to create a multi-line text input on a CLI. Well,
Sure.
like we've got multi-line text inputs on the web and they work just great.
Okay.
Like why
Okay.
not just use that, right? Like
So
why
if you're
yeah,
doing server maintenance, let's say, and you have some utility scripts that you've created, you can't really use a browser for that. I mean, you could set up a web app that sort of creates a world in which it interacts with the server, but it's so much easier to just put those scripts on the server itself and do the maintenance there and run the script. So I think where those drop downs and those like more advanced interfaces come from is in situations where you have to be on the CLI, or it's way easier to be on the CLI. It just creates a better experience. And yeah, it might be over engineered, it might be overkill, but it's certainly more pleasurable to use. You know, it's way more user friendly.
for
You know,
sure.
the Symphony multi-select stuff was great, but it's like autocomplete. Remember to put a comma, because if you don't put that comma, like that gets funky, and then get the next value. And it was just you kind of had to do things in the exact right way. Whereas something like prompts or Charm CLI are really pushing that to say, okay, well, let's just get this a little closer to what we're used to these days, but keep it in the command line. And so the command line's not for everybody. I don't know that it's, I don't know if it's overused. I feel like that's coming in a little hot, but but I'm also somebody that, while I don't like live in the terminal, I'm not like a NeoVim guy. I'm not at that level. I have a million utility scripts that I use that are CLI based, and I don't want to build out a whole user interface in the browser for that. I want to just whip up a quick script and let it fly. You know, does that make sense?
No, it totally does. I mean, and yeah, I'm kind of just like trying to drive some discord to get
Sure, sure.
the conversation started. But I do I think I've just been thinking about this kind of leading up to the podcast, and I just wonder if is there an alternate reality where we got better at letting browsers execute code with elevated privileges securely and like long
That's my
running
dream.
processes, right?
I would love
Where
that. Truly.
because
Yeah.
like frankly, it's just it is easier to type like text area and have a submit
Yes.
button, right? Like
100%.
that these are the things that browsers are really good at doing. And even if you don't even if you don't apply any styling or any like nice UI affordances, even just a bare window with a basic single invocable controller is
Yeah.
going to be probably a lot easier for most folks to work with and reason about.
Yeah,
Yeah, and it's just a
I've tried
good
to
question.
convert some of these things that I wanted to share that lived in the CLI, because not everybody's comfortable there. I've tried to convert them to browser based, but the end result is that they're doing stuff on your local system. They're doing things on your computer, and it's not really possible to tunnel back down from, and nor necessarily should it be to
Yeah.
tunnel. Like if I put this up on a server, that it should be able to do something on your computer in a more local way than we're used to.
Yeah.
And so the alternative is saying, okay, well, Composer require this, start up a server, and then it will work on your local computer, but you've got to kind of boot it up every time, or you've got to create a native app, which is becoming more and more doable as time goes on if you're not a native app developer. But yeah, I've thought about this like 100 times. Like I wish that there was a safe route to build these sort of things with a proper GUI and, in the browser preferably. Because you're right, like people know what to do with that more instinctively. That's what they interact with the majority of the time. So,
Yeah. Yeah, and
yeah,
even beyond that, it's like the ergonomics, the accessibility, the all
totally.
that stuff just like
Totally.
you kind of you get more for free, maybe not for free, but that said, I mean, these browser experiments that you've been doing have been incredible.
Yeah.
And, as a as a nerd, I'm like so into it.
No, it's fun, but like you said, it's not practical, and I think that's why I was surprised that people were latching onto it because I was like, what are you going to do with this? Like, you're not going to build an actual app that's a full text-based user interface in the terminal that you're going to distribute out. I don't think so. I'm not sure why you would, but it's super fun to build, and it like works your brain in this like completely different way because you're just thinking about how this comes. You've got to build it sort of character by character, which
Yeah.
is either really fun, which is me, or infuriating, which is probably most people.
Yeah.
But
Well,
there are some very specific challenges in that within that realm, and thinking about terminal width and height and not letting things overflow, and it's hard. A lot of hard lessons learned in that realm over the past year or so.
I want to
Yeah.
get into that stuff, but I think that it speaks to the fact that I don't think enough people acknowledge that programming is as much, if not more, an art than anything else. You know,
Hmm.
it's a creative pursuit,
Yeah.
and a big part of art is like for the sake of it, right? We obviously it's great that we can get paid to do this work. And there are lots of people who do the work just because it's a job, and there's nothing wrong with that either. Just like there are a lot of designers and artists that are doing it just for a day job and there's nothing wrong with that either.
Totally.
But I think in the end, if you're pursuing programming for some sense of fulfillment, right, you have to like get into the artistry of it. And I think that's why these CLI experiments have connected with so many people, because it's like it's almost like programming in the purest form of art, right? There isn't a
Yeah.
ton of there isn't a ton of utility here. It's just like incredibly cool, incredibly
It's just
impressive,
fun. It's just
fun,
fun.
like yeah,
Yeah.
it's great. And
And
I
I
yeah,
yeah, I come from an art background, so like I think that was maybe what was fueling it. Is that's what it felt like. If it didn't feel like there was no means to an end here, it was just let's just have fun. That's all it
yeah,
was. And it's just at the end of the day, you're just manipulating 1,000 strings and printing them out to the terminal, and that's not fun for a lot of people. But like I don't know, it really scratched an itch for me. I was like, oh, this is rad. I'm really enjoying this. So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
It's like my wife was just talking about this art piece that we saw years ago that popped up in a it's somewhere, and there was like a TikTok that she was that popped up talking about it, and it's this incredible like recreation of a kitchen that's like all beaded, like the entire thing. It's a full scale kitchen, and the entire thing down to like the Kellogg's logo on the cereal box,
Okay.
everything is all beaded, right? And like it's kind of that same thing of to sit
Like, why did
there
you
and
do this?
place 10 million beads. I don't know how many it would be, but it's just an incredible amount, right? Is
Yeah.
obviously just unreasonably tedious. But the expression of art that's the result of that is so impressive. And I think there's something to be said for sort of the labor is part of the artistry, right? Like
Yeah, yeah.
I don't
These
know,
are my
that's the type
beads,
of
is
art
what
that
you're
connects
saying.
with me. Yeah, so each character is another bead, right?
Yeah.
Each
10
antsy
million
escape
beads coming
sequence.
together.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
I don't know. This is me. I this is a half-baked thought. I didn't really plan to talk about it in this context, but
No,
I think
I
there's a
think you're
lot
right. I think
there.
there's something about the labor going into something and the care and the love that like you can sense this took a long time and somebody really put this together piece by piece.
Yeah.
There's something about that connects with people, I guess. You're right. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. So
totally.
you've said a bunch of times that you were surprised that people were were as responsive to this thing as
Yeah.
they have been, and I would not be surprised at all. I mean, it's like, yeah, it's this incredible thing that you put out there. It's really cool.
It's just like, when you look at like the Twitter landscape in particular, you see a lot of like, Laravel hot tips or Laravel, and you see like what is, and that wasn't really ever like the goal here. It just kind of felt like I was like, I'm kind of just like showboating a little bit. and,
Sure.
and, and like, I guess, yeah, I don't know. I felt a little weird about that at times, but yeah, I don't know. I just wanted to like share stuff I thought was cool. That was basically it. Anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, so
Yeah.
I mean, I'm really curious. I haven't looked at I've looked at prompts to the degree of like I've found a couple of the functions that aren't documented and played with them, like, but that's about the extent of it.
Okay.
And I know my I have a general sense that there's sort of like a state machine type component and a rendering type component.
Yeah.
But yeah, like what has it been? What is the process of like building these more sophisticated CLI components like?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, shout out to Jess. Like she put this together in such a way that is so ergonomic. And as soon as
Mhm.
I like kind of saw the pieces being assembled, I was like, oh, I get this. I just clicked very, very hard with it
That's
and
awesome.
thought like this makes so much sense because I had built out a terminal library, or I attempted to build out a terminal library that did similar, sort of like a more, it was basically replicating this library called Clack, which is a node CLI
Mhm.
library. And was trying to recreate it in PHP. So I know the pain points, and I wasn't like super successful at doing that.
Mhm.
And I learned a lot along the way. And then so when Jess came along with this, I was like, oh, this makes so much more sense with the way she set this up. So yeah, it's basically every prompt in and of itself is sort of like a little TUI, right? So I took that and kind of blew it up, but it's the same principle where there's a state class, there's a little like state machine, and there's a renderer class, and the renderer class is just this invocable class that accepts an instance of the state machine, and it gets spun up new every time. So you're drawing the full app every time, and you're just returning
Yeah.
this giant string that represents the app in the terminal at the moment of the state machine. And
And so
so that alone already sort of clicks in a React way,
yeah,
where
yeah,
UI is a function of state. Like if you've ever dealt with React, it's very in that world.
absolutely.
And
Yeah.
so that was the first thing where I was like, oh, here we go. Got
And
it.
so
So all I need
does
to do is think about
prompts
this moment.
does prompts handle all the like c- clearing and resetting like the cursor position and all that stuff, and you're
Right.
just basically like, okay, given this state, I'm going to render it this way.
Yeah. So basically, it captures the last set of frames that it rendered, and
Mhm.
then the next time it renders, it compares the previous frames with the current frames.
God,
It
it
finds
really
the
is like
first
React.
line that's different, and then it clears everything after that and rewrites that. So it
Okay.
handles all of this for you out of the box. Like you don't have to do any of this, which is amazing, and sort of the reason why building with prompts is kind of delightful.
Yeah,
And it's
that's
just such
amazing.
a clear separation of concerns. This is all we're doing is handling state and key presses and things like that over here. And all we're doing over here is just building up a massive string that will eventually get printed out. And you kind of, for the most part, don't have to care about the mechanism between for like
Right.
99% of use cases.
So
Yeah.
what about like the thinking in columns and rows and like ANSI escape sequences and all that stuff? Is it
Yeah,
kind of
man.
dealing with that for you too?
There's a lot of helpers, but at the end of the
Okay.
day, you do have to like consider that constantly. But she's built in like so many little things that make that easier. And I ended up creating this sort of little library called Chewy, which I don't know. I just think
Love
of like
that.
Michael Caine saying Tui, and it came out as Chewy, and I thought that was funny, and so I just called it Chewy. But yeah, I because there were things that was doing that she doesn't care about. It doesn't make any sense for prompts to care about it, like centering something horizontally in the terminal given a width, height, and some content. It's like she doesn't need that because she's not taking over the whole thing. Whereas I was like, I had to do that constantly. So I finally was like, okay, we need
Sure.
a center. We need a center horizontally. We need a center vertical. We need a pin to bottom so we can move content to the bottom based on how much has been printed out. Like there's just all these little
Yeah.
mechanisms I created, but it's all calculating string widths, how many new lines have been printed to the terminal, how wide is the current line. It's constant measuring, but you're also like stripping. You're saying, okay, this
Right.
string has anti-escape sequences in it already. Get rid of those before we measure it because they don't count. So it's and then it's making sure you don't go past the width or the height of the terminal. I mean, I could go on forever about
Yeah.
this because this has
How do
been,
you
yeah,
how do you deal with that? Like, because yeah, you're stripping the NC escape sequences, but
right,
you have to maintain some sense of. Actually, let's stop for a second. For those who are not familiar with how terminals are rendered, right? There's
right,
the plain text, and
yep.
then there's what's called an escape sequence. It starts with a slash and an X maybe, or slash and or no slash in a
Slash e,
bracket.
but there's also
Yeah,
variations in the world. Yeah, yeah,
and it's just plain text, but it's telling the terminal, hey, whatever's after this is rendered, say, red foreground or red background or
right,
bold text or whatever. And different terminals support a different variety of escape sequences.
right.
So when you're
And it also
looking
is
at
stuff like cursor control and erasing. Like these are all
right,
controlled by printing escape sequences to the terminal,
right,
but they don't count for the rendering. I.e., like they don't ever appear anywhere, so
right.
you don't get to consider them in string lengths or anything like that.
So that's kind of what we were getting to, is like you may have a line of text that is 200 characters and only 170 of those characters are actually going to be printed to the screen. And
Right.
so when you get to like word wrap, line wrap, right? You're
Yeah.
dealing with incredibly difficult
Yeah.
calculus here, because it's like you're almost having to keep track of two separate sort of states. Like I can almost imagine like getting into like tokenization, like some sort of like parsing system that like tokenizes might be worthwhile so that you can like
Yeah.
abstract some of that stuff away. But I don't know.
Yeah.
It's
So
wild.
it gets gnarly super fast. As soon as they're in a string, it's just a different world. You're in a different realm of dealing with it. So you kind of have to assume that they're going to be in any string you're dealing with, unless you have like absolute control over what the input is.
Right.
So like even something like string pad, you're going to use that like a lot, right? Because you're going to want to pad either left, right, or both of a string with some spaces as you're laying
Yeah.
things out. But you can't use it because it's not measuring the string accurately if you're passing in anything with anti-escape code. So you bet you're rewriting all of these string functions to account for anti-escape codes. Like
Yeah.
speaking of word wrap, where I'm working on like a multi-line input for prompts, like a
Yeah.
PR, and Jess in the middle of it was like, we don't have a multi-byte word wrap. And like just forget anti-escape codes. We don't have
Right.
multi-byte word wrap. And multi-byte
Right.
is pretty important when you're dealing with all these like weird characters and laying things out. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna write multi-byte word wrap. And we both took like a swing at it, and we kind of met in the middle, and we were like, okay, what's the best pieces of both of these? And so we wrote, I think, one that covers a fair amount of use cases. I think like sort of the 99% of it. And I'm sure there's some edge cases that emoji were, well, that was tricky.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, to get back to sort of the crux of it is that yeah, you don't get to use any of the like kind of baked in stuff most of the time because you've got to deal with these anti escape codes. That is a thing for sure.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, have you considered like essentially like the string helper, just like a ANSI aware string helper that just handles all that, like introduces all those like fluent
Yeah,
methods
a
for
lot
you?
of those things. Oh, the fluent methods. No, but that's a good idea. I could probably macro those in basically if we're talking about like the Laravel string helper. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, I'm imagining a whole new class that essentially implements all of the same methods as the string helper, but all of those methods would be ANSI
Mm,
aware. So you could do,
that's cool.
something like ANSI open parentheses and then pass in a
Yeah.
block of text. And then if you want to do like pad left or whatever, it would account for that padding.
That's smarter than what I did, which is just one off. Every time I needed something, it was either a new method or a helper function or something. Because that's the way it was in prompts already. She has stuff like pad in there, and
Oh,
trimming is hard because if
trimming
you
is so hard.
trim the escape sequence off, you've now, because it's the way they work is it's like an opening escape sequence and a closing escape sequence, and what's between those for formatting at least. So if you trim off the last of it and you don't close it out, you've just styled everything after it by accident
Yep.
because you never closed out the styling. So she has a lot of these little helper methods, which is again why using prompts was sort of a good way to go because it was all baked in for it. But I paired with Ben Holman a while back, and we sort of both were interested in the same thing weirdly, which was like, how do we do word wrap with formatted strings in the terminal? And I was like, well, we should do this together because it's a
Yeah.
really hard problem. Because if
Yeah.
you think about like inherently making that happen alone is very tricky. But then trying to continue, like if you break on a style and it's bold up here, you want it to remain bold on the next line. So you've got to sort of collect all these styles on the line before, reapply them and undo them on the next line. It's a whole circus.
Oh, so I actually
Yeah.
didn't know that. You can't just those styles don't apply to the next line automatically?
They do, but if you're, let's say you're rendering them in like a gray box, the
Oh,
moment you do
right.
that gray line,
Right.
that's
Yeah.
game over. Yeah.
Right.
So you
For
kind
the
of have to
border.
assume that whatever's after, I mean, depends on how much control you have over the situation, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah,
Yeah, there's a lot of
it
consideration
definitely
there.
feels like there's a world where, at least for the formatting stuff, I don't know. I'm not real familiar. I'm fairly familiar with the formatting stuff. I'm not very familiar with the like positional and clearing escapes. So I don't know exactly how that would work. Excuse me. Because in those cases it's not really like applying state to the current character position. It's potentially changing the character position, right? So it's not
Right.
state based, it's something else. But at least for the
Yeah.
formatting stuff, yeah, it just seems like there's potentially a world where, you parse, you almost like write your own ANSI parser that like keeps track of character by character any flags that are set, right?
Yeah.
And
It's a good
then
idea, actually. It's a
like
strong idea.
you could even, I mean, not to, this podcast is called over engineered, so I'm not even going to say not to over engineer it, but you could even probably, like, there's not that many of them. You could probably do it in a bit mask and literally just have like an array of an array of ints that represents all the
Right.
bit flags for every single character in the text sequence. And then like you basically would be able to just say, give me these 30 characters and all the style details for those 30 characters. And then you could
Right.
just sort of have some sort of optimization mechanism that sort of collapses those down to the lowest number of escape sequences necessary to apply all those styles to all those characters.
Right.
But I could see like adding some of those interesting, like abstracting some of this stuff away so that then, you know, you have just the string as just a string, but you also know for like the 30-second character in this string, like these are the styles that need to be applied to it. And if you break it into
Yeah.
two lines, it's pretty easy because you would just split both the string and the bit masks. You probably wouldn't even keep a string. You'd probably keep an array of characters and an array of bits.
I
There's
almost
something
followed you
there.
there. We're close to being to following you. But yeah, there is something there. There's something about normalizing this in a way that's not so one off. I've been doing it really one off and to sort of like make this more of a normalized process, and then you can apply these methods a la carte as you want,
Right.
as you would expect them to be applied, which would be nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I've only done, the most I've had to do is there have been a couple of CLIs where it felt really important to me that the like sort of opening message was very clear. Like if,
Mhm.
if you're potentially doing something very dangerous, where I really wanted to, highlight words in the middle of a multi-line sentence or something like that. And
Yep.
I for the most part, I just use the Symfony stuff that kind of parses XML into these escape sequences, but that stuff falls apart if you're getting into multi-line.
Right.
And so I've experimented with trying to do exactly that, like the word wrap, and felt some of this pain. And I can't imagine, like, that's the worst that I've had to deal with, is just I have a string that has like red text somewhere in the middle of it, and I want to split
Yeah.
it to as many lines as are necessary for whatever width terminal you're in. And that was
Yeah.
bad enough.
That's the whole thing. That's everything I'm doing. And it's all that. It's all those considerations. I mean, yeah, if you're not into that, I don't think you're gonna like building out these TUIs if you didn't like that little experiment. Yeah. It's all considering that stuff. And you'll notice I have no hair. It's because I've been building out these experiments, and some nights I was like, man, I can't. Why is this one character to the right? It should be here, and it's here, and it's like little things like that, and
Yeah.
you have to break it down bit by bit, and it's tedious. I will give you that. I will
Yeah.
give you that.
Yeah, I mean, I could be totally wrong. Like my programmer brain says, well, let's just spend, 2,000 hours building the perfect abstraction and then all those
Yeah.
problems go away.
Right.
But obviously, how often does that actually work out in practice? Like, you know,
True.
that
You
abstraction
you could
should
probably
be
cover
there.
a lot of it though. You could probably cover
Yeah.
a lot of it. Yeah.
Yeah, it would be
Yeah.
cool. So, I have a sort of, not pet peeve. I feel like my experience of writing sort of terminal apps in Laravel is that
Mm.
95% of the time, essentially what I'm doing is writing a command that queries some large data set and iterates over it to perform some operation, like one by one or chunk by chunk.
Okay.
Does that does that resonate with you, or is that just like my experience of the world?
Of building these little one-off commands that people
Well,
generally use,
in
or
terms
like
of like
utility
the
commands.
yeah, the actual utility commands that we build as Laravel developers.
Yeah, that's typically about it. And you are not feeling that is the vibe I'm catching. You were
No,
saying
no,
that should be what?
I don't mind. I don't mind it at all. I what am I trying to say? It's just been my experience that that's like 90% of what building terminal apps is like. And
Sure.
so, I built out a solution for that we use, and it's just funny to me because it's one of those things where we use this thing. It's called conveyor belt, and it essentially is just that. It's like it handles any type of data set that you might deal with, whether it's database or CSV or Excel file or whatever. You just pass it data, and it abstracts everything away so that you just tell it how to get at the data and what to do on each individual row, right?
Right.
And it gives you
Okay.
lots of nice little features like step mode or debug mode, or like, printing more or less information.
Sure.
And this is just one of those things where like I put it out there and we use it all the time, and it's just like the idea did not resonate really with many people. And I think in part it's just because it's the type of thing where it's just not that sexy. It's like it just it just meets a very basic need in a not
Yeah.
particularly exciting
It's
way, but
utility. It's
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 super
it's doing the job.
utilitarian.
Yeah. It's a great name though. I love the name. Conveyor
Yeah,
belt
I was
is
very happy with the name. Yes.
yeah, yeah, it's strong.
And yeah, and it's just I've all since then I often think like, is this just like the experience that we've bumped into, that like the type of work that we do at Internet actually just happens to be really specific to that use case, or is it
Mm.
something that's more broadly true? Just
I
made me
I have
curious.
found that to be, in my experience, pretty broadly true. Like I build a lot of these little one-off scripts, or even scripts that end up being jobs that basically take a bunch of data, do something with that data, and then move on.
Yeah.
I have talked to people though where that's not the case. We're like, oh, we're never in the CLI ever, and we never build commands out. Or I mean, like, I just feel like I'm doing it all the time. It's for better or for worse my default mode. Even when proving something out, just to see like, can I do X Y Z? Like the command itself is tiny. It's usually like shunted out somewhere else, but it is still running in the command. In the CLI. I want to see. I don't want to have to build out a whole world of things just to prove out an idea really quickly. And so
Sure.
I don't know. That's where my brain goes.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah, I
also
think for a
there's
lot
something
of
about
those.
the constraint of it. Like when you're building out for the browser, there's the whole world is your oyster, right? And you can get lost in doing a lot of other things that are not the problem or not the thing you're trying to do.
Yeah.
Ultimately, not at the core of it. And so there's almost freedom in the constraint where you can build faster and iterate a little faster if it's just a CLI command.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
I think constraints are often, you know, a blessing in disguise. Like it really does force you to focus in.
totally, totally.
Yeah. No, I mean, and I don't mean to say like in the beginning, I still do partially believe that like as developers, we maybe reach for a really fancy CLI interface too soon when maybe just like a simple web form would actually be better. And I
Interesting,
do
interesting.
wish that I wish that it was a little bit easier to build a web app that dealt with for me it's like two things. It's either long running processes or
Right,
privileges that
right,
lead me to think about CLI. Because there's a third, which is like scheduled tasks, and for that I think it's a perfectly appropriate tool, right? I
totally.
For things that are just running in the background on a schedule, or are being queued occasionally, like that is that why would you build a UI for that thing? Because it fundamentally doesn't have a UI.
Right, right.
And so it's more for the more for the things that tend to actually look like a GUI but just are in the terminal, a TUI, that I still do wish that we had better tools to do that in the browser, but we don't.
Yeah,
And
I would
that's the
agree.
reality.
I would agree. Yeah. Yeah. No,
It
you're
would be
anti
cool.
CLI. I get it. The message has been received. You're anti CLI. And
Oh no.
that's a choice. That's a life you're living. That's up to
I'll have
you.
to edit this part out.
Yeah. I would typically agree. I mean, I'm very comfortable in that world, but it narrows your audience. It's not for everybody. So, obviously putting something in the browser widens the audience of that tool can be used
Yeah.
by.
Yeah.
So
Which
it would
is
be nice to
sometimes the
have
point,
those features on it. Yeah, for sure.
right?
100%.
Sometimes
100%.
it's like these are administrative only things that I actually don't want anyone else to have access to.
You should know how to use the CLI to run this tool. Like
Yes. Yeah.
nobody that
100%.
doesn't shouldn't
Yeah.
be. Yeah, yeah, 100%.
So what we recently met for the first time at PHP NYC meetup.
Yeah, yeah.
And leading up to that, we were talking a little bit about React PHP.
Mhm.
How much have you been looking at leveraging something like that, an event loop, to build these tools?
I used it for two of them. I think one or two of them. I had built this chat app that was it was real. It was real enough. It was real enough for like the proof of concept of it. But
Yeah.
it used React PHP for that because there were it needed to be sort of like async ish in order for like everybody to receive the messages
Yeah.
without having to like poke constantly. And so I it was a while ago. I can't quite remember what I did with it, but I've tried to reach for it a couple of other times and I'm like, oh, this is it. This is the
Yeah.
solution. And to
Yeah.
get it to play nice, I actually was thinking about this the other day and I was like, I think I was just going about it all wrong in terms of like understanding the loop fundamentally and then understanding how to connect that to the rendering mechanism of prompts. I think I was
Mhm.
just trying to like bolt two things together that weren't quite ever going to match, right?
Sure.
But I think like now that I've had some time and stepped away, I think I could probably sit down and go, oh yeah, this is actually what this looks like. I don't need to be so complicated about it. It's probably much simpler than that. But it's a it's a cool little suite. They've got some cool things over there. I haven't had the opportunity to play with everything, but I've done some of the event loop stuff for the chat app, and that worked out pretty well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder honestly if the name is part of the problem. It's like React just has taken over the world
Yeah.
as what you mean when you say React,
For better or for
the
worse,
JavaScript.
that is
Yeah, for
definitely
better or for
true.
worse.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, I was talking to someone at the meetup and said something about React PHP, and they were like, "You mean the JavaScript library?" Like
Oh
it's
yeah.
just there
Interesting.
is a little confusion there. But I also
Yeah.
wonder if, with Franken PHP and Octane and just like a little bit more capacity in the ecosystem to run long running
Yeah.
PHP processes,
Yeah.
if we're going to see more of that over the next 2-3 years than we did before. It
I
feels
I
like it.
I found that when I was constantly trying to do an experiment that dealt with async in a real way, and
Hmm.
I was constantly butting up against it, and I was like, "Ugh, I guess this is just not what I'm supposed to be doing with this, or what PHP really wants to do." But I
Yeah.
would love to sit down with somebody who is way more proficient than I am in React PHP and watch them. I'd be like, "This is what I want to do. How would you go about this?" And they're
Yeah.
like, "Oh, it's like the most basic use case of React PHP," and they'd probably just like whip it out, right? But I would love to solve like the prong game was a great example. Like that really needed to be an async sort of event driven thing, and I was really struggling to put that together in a way that was sensible, right? And so it ended up just basically doing like a lot of pinging things, which is
Hmm.
not the ideal scenario. And I reduced that by only having basically one side of the equation doing all the pinging and the other side kind of sending, as it were.
Okay.
But it didn't feel good. I didn't like it. I wish it was better. I wish it was proper. If we had like a WebSocket server and JavaScript in the browser, like I could build that in a minute. It would be great.
Right.
But that's not what we were dealing with. And I would love, if anybody wants to hit me up and show me how to properly do like some React PHP or something like that, I would 100% get on board with that. Are you familiar? Have you dealt with it a lot?
I I would not say that I'm anywhere near an expert. I've used it in a couple of really interesting places. And in fact, like, that was originally going to be the premise of my talk in New York. I think the most interesting, well, I think the most practical place that we've used it is in integration testing with Stripe. So
Oh, interesting.
when we're doing full Steam integration testing with Stripe, there this is something I'd love to package it up, or at least get this out into the world a little more. We have this incredible little trick of basically spinning up the Stripe CLI in a background process from the test suite
Okay.
and putting a listener on that CLI's output in a React PHP loop.
Okay.
And so in our test suite, we can essentially say, do this thing on a real Stripe test account, and
Right.
then activate the event loop and wait for all the webhooks to come in.
That's smart.
Actually, real webhooks to come in from the real Stripe service. Wait
Right.
for those webhook payloads to come in as we expect, and then we actually package those up and deliver the payload to our webhook controller. And then once all the webhooks have come in, we like release the event loop and
Just clip it.
continue
Yeah.
continue back to like the synchronous testing code, where we're like, okay, now we know that all the events that we expected to come in have been received and dispatched to the webhook controller. Like, assert that the app is now in the state that we expect. And
I like that. I like that a lot.
using the event loop to essentially just sort of take synchronous code and sort of just like inject some asynchronous stuff in there has
Yeah,
been so cool.
that's awesome.
It's a really powerful approach, because you basically just have this like, in that case it's just like a process just sitting there, and it's running and it's
Right.
passing standard out, but like our event loop is just not reading standard out until we're ready for it, and then we just run it, flush all the standard out. And we wouldn't, in that case, we wouldn't actually have to use React PHP, but it makes it a lot easier.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
place where I got the most familiar with it, that is also just like really interesting, but ended up kind of being a bust, was, how familiar are you with Dusk, the test?
yeah.
The
For sure. Yes, very.
So I built out this whole sort of feature complete experiment where I replaced all the internals of Dusk with an event loop that spawned like multiple background processes, which effectively let us. I mean, the main downside of Dusk is that your tests are running in a totally separate process from the application that you're testing. So
Right.
you lose many of the really beautiful test affordances of
Yes.
Laravel,
Yeah.
because you can't just say, hey, just make the app the state that I care about and then do some
Right.
tests. You have to send commands over HTTP, and it gets really clunky real quick. So instead, what this does is it just like spins up a web server, and it spins up the Chrome driver, and it spins up like a third process. Is kind of like a broker thing that manages passing
Hmm.
all these messages around. And so you can essentially just write Dusk style tests where that one background process is listening to your web requests,
Right.
and it's forwarding those requests over like a text channel to the main thread, the main process.
Right.
That main process in the event loop is listening for both the Chrome driver, web driver communication stuff, and the HTTP request stuff. And when a new request comes in, it actually passes it to the in the main thread.
Right.
So like when a test comes in from your when a request comes in to the Chrome instance on your machine, that request is actually passed to the actual like instance of your app running in your test suite.
Okay.
Is this making sense?
I think so. So the thing you're trying to accomplish is that like there's a disconnect between like the way we normally run testing in Laravel and the way we set up state and the way that the integration testing works, which is a little like further away because you
Yeah.
can't set it up in the same way. So this allows you to do that basically. Is that what you're
Yeah,
basically saying?
because it's all asynchronous,
Yeah. Yeah.
it lets us essentially, instead of, well, it lets us bring things into the main process that we care about, right?
Right.
and
Right.
and everything else we can run asynchronously in the background. And so you get just a normal synchronous test where the actual browser requests from Chrome are being handled inside of your test, just as though you had done like this get, in your
Right.
test.
That's cool. It didn't
It's
work out, you're saying?
it it works. The
Question
problem
mark.
is the problem is, I mean, the main premise, one of the main selling points for me was, the other upside is you get all the speed bonus of, you're only like refreshing your database once. You don't have to like clear
Totally.
your database between each test, because now you can just run everything in transactions. And the initial experiments, like things were running twice as fast compared to our Dust test suite. Once the whole thing was built, I actually and it was actually doing all of the things that Dusk does.
Yeah.
It ended up being slower than Dusk, which was
Oh,
really
no way.
disappointing.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's a bummer.
I
Yeah.
I think in the end, it's just like passing boatloads of request data across like text channels is slow.
Yeah. Yeah. Starts
And
to
it
get a
was
little clogged in
slow
there.
enough, yeah, that it just, for us, the speed was a big piece of it. And so when the speed was gone, it kind of, my
It's
interest
like,
in
why
it
are we doing
fizzled.
this anymore?
The,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
ergonomics of it is still really great. And I actually think that there's potentially a way to do a similar thing in Dusk. I have a potential different approach that I've been exploring, because the Chrome driver, like the package that we use to control Chrome driver in PHP,
Mhm.
it's like the responsibilities of different things is split up such that you could essentially swap out the thing that actually sends the messages. And if we were able to make just that piece asynchronous, you could
Yeah.
get a lot more of the upside. Maybe it wouldn't be quite as, yeah, it might not be quite as powerful, but it could be that you could spin up everything then in the same process and just sort of pass control between different pieces inside of that event loop.
Makes sense.
So I don't know.
You gonna dive back in?
Another
You
day,
gonna figure it
yeah.
out?
Not yet, but someday.
A while back, I created for myself. I was building this tool called Bellows, and I was doing a lot of testing on it, and I was writing a lot of like unit tests, which were good, but I actually really wanted to see it like running. I wanted to make sure it was
Yeah,
like really running. So I created for myself Dusk for the terminal, and it automates running stuff in the terminal as you would actually run it, and it just is sort of like this
amazing.
loose wrapper around like the Unix expect command. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it sort of basically says like run this, expect this to happen, timeout this long. Like, there's you can kind of pass a
Okay.
bunch of things to it and you can create these big expect scripts. And I think one day I might package it up and throw it out there. I don't know how many people would actually like use it, but it was immensely useful to me. I think the one thing that would be missing for sort of mass appeal is that I was finding the exceptions, like when the expect script would fail for one reason or another, it was hard to piece back together like precisely which part had actually failed, like if you weren't watching
Uh-huh.
it. So
Mhm.
that would have to get sorted out. But I think that's easy enough. I didn't feel the need to spend that much time there since I was like literally watching it run. But it was
Right.
so satisfying to say, like, okay, let's map these 10 scenarios that I know I want to run, actually simulate the typing, actually type things out, and like it was great. It was great. It
That's
was really
so
a cool
cool.
little project. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
even just for prompts, like that would be an incredible testing tool.
Yeah. Yeah. True. It's sort of on my. I have like a big backlog of like you should put this out there, and that's sort of in the top five, I would say, because I think people would at
Nice.
least like find it interesting, if nothing else.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
that's really cool. I mean, I love, just being able to say dusk for the terminal is
I know I
pretty
wanted to call it
cool.
Dawn, and then somebody else had already taken Dawn, and I was like, I don't know what to
Oh,
call this thing, but
that's me.
I'll figure. Yeah. Oh,
That
are you
my
Dawn?
my thing, the thing was Dawn,
No
the
way.
experiment that I, yeah.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's so funny that we just came to that conclusion. That's
Sorry
hilarious.
about that.
All right, I'll fight you for Dawn. We'll fight for it.
Maybe we can just make it a unified testing, integration testing system for Laravel apps, covering
Or
both browser
maybe I'll just
and
call
terminal.
mine noon. It'll be between dusk and I just I don't know.
Nice.
It's
Do
just
you
making
watch
things quicker.
Foundation? I've been,
No.
oh,
Is that an Apple? Is
it's,
that an
yeah,
Apple show? Yeah,
it
no,
is
I've seen like trailers and
the
stuff. I haven't
ads for
actually
it.
watched it.
There's like a emperor who has cloned himself, and there's always three of him.
Okay.
There's like a child version, a adult version, and then like a old version, and they're like working together and sort of passing the knowledge down to each other. So like
Oh, that's cool.
as the oldest one, like when the oldest one dies, they like clone a new young one, and it's a very interesting, it's
That's
actually a
interesting.
really cool plot device. But they call it, though, it's like Brother Dawn, Brother Day, and Brother Dusk is what they call the three of
Oh, day. Obviously, day was right there. It's another D word. I
them.
should. Yeah, there it is. There it
I'm
is. I'll
sure
call it
that no
day.
one has used the name day for
I'm
anything
gonna claim it
before.
right now on packages right now during this call.
Nice.
Nice. Yeah, so I think
That's
I'll
funny.
put that out there at some point. I'm not sure. We'll see.
It's so cool. Yeah, that's a great idea. I mean, because those things are, it's just hard to test those things.
Yeah, yeah. It's we have some good mechanisms like for testing artisan commands and things like that in Laravel, but it's still, sometimes you just want to see it run. You want to make sure
Yeah.
that like at the end of the
Yeah.
day, you punch in these characters and press enter, like it's gonna do its thing.
Well, and
So
especially for something like something where the actual like terminal output
yeah,
and not just like the text output, but the actual like what you see in the terminal at a certain terminal size
yep.
matters. Yeah, like
Yeah, that's
that's
true. It's a lot of like if I make it really narrow, is it gonna just bust? Like, is it gonna just freak
right,
out? And so
right.
yeah, that's yeah, totally. Totally.
Yeah, no, that's cool. Do you have any interesting new experiments coming up, or are you taking a break?
No, I'm working on I'm doing Lyricon India, so I'm working on that
Oh,
talk
that's
like
right.
pretty heads down. Yeah, in fact, like a lot of what we talked about earlier, like were verbatim snippets. Like you were like, you get nothing for free. And I was like, that's literally a slide in my talk. And so I was like, oh no, we're just gonna reveal the whole thing now. But no, I'm working on that. I'm working on a Laracast course on this stuff too, which has been fun. And
That's
so yeah,
exciting.
I've been like very heads down on a couple things, so I haven't had time to do it, but I miss it, and we're probably gonna get back into it in April, I would
Yeah.
say.
That's
Yeah,
awesome. I mean, that's so cool to I am sort of having FOMO about India. I thought about going. It looks like
yeah,
such an incredible. It just looks like such an incredible event, and it's the location is going to be so cool because of the that festival that's happening like right before,
yeah,
right
yeah.
after.
It's right after. Yeah,
Yeah. Are
yeah.
you going to stay
It's
for
gonna.
that?
Yeah, so actually, that's it. The conference is over my wife's birthday, so we're making this also
Oh,
like a birthday trip. So she's going to come with,
nice.
and we're going to stay an extra couple days and kind of do a whirlwind India trip afterward.
That's cool.
Yeah, yeah, it'll be fun. It'll be fun. We're trying to frantically plan that out now because,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, it's
So
coming up.
it's coming up. It's coming up real fast. Yeah, a
Should
couple
I not
weeks.
say
No,
that?
no, we're good. We're good. We're doing
That's
okay over
awesome.
here. But yeah,
So how like you work day to day, you work on like the web stuff for this for a gaming company, did you say?
yeah. So the company is Digital Extremes. The big thing that they're known for is this game called Warframe, which
Okay.
I'm not a gamer, but when I say that to people who are like dyed in the wool gamers, they seem to know what I'm talking about, and it's a very
Okay.
popular game. So yeah, that game is running on all the consoles, all the platforms. It's like a free to play game that's been around for like 10 years and has
Okay.
iterated for a long time. And so the web component of that is they can purchase things on the website that need to show up in various consoles and various things, you know. So it's a lot of like brokering that. And then we get like big bursts of traffic because when they
Mhm.
do what's called like a Twitch drop or something like that, people just go flying to the site. So we're sort of handling a lot of influx at times. But yeah, that's the primary mode of the job is handling stuff like that.
So has did any of this CLI stuff come out of that work, or is was it really just like a I want to do something else?
No, I mean I'm always kind of doing something else on the side just to keep my brain busy. Like
Yeah, for sure.
the day to day coding stuff, even when I was freelancing, is can be a little bit like rote. It can be a little bit like I feel like I'm doing the same thing
Sure.
all the time. We're all
Yeah.
building. Everybody thinks their app is a unique snowflake. There's not a lot of snowflakes out there.
It's all
So
tables
the
and
core,
forms.
right? It's all tables and forms at the end of the day. But yeah, so I always try to keep something on the side that I'm either trying to learn or I'm trying to do, or just something to kind of stoke the fires a little bit. And I latched onto that, and that was just happening at night. Like every night, I would kind of after the kid went to bed, I would pop on for a little while and try to time box it to like an hour or two to try to get an experiment out and published. And yeah, that's what it ended up being. But nothing came out of work because we don't actually do a lot of CLI stuff at work. It's
Mhm.
quite the opposite, actually. Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right, I'm gonna pivot to. I'm curious. So you have a acting background,
I do.
right? And
Yes.
I saw on your website like you've done some like Broadway. I think we were
Oh,
talking
yeah,
about, is
yeah,
there like
yeah.
a Broadway revenue site or something like that?
Yeah. So a lot of my friends are still in the arts, right? And
Yeah.
so that's basically the bulk. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to do PHP NYC, because I was like, I need some tech friends, some people I can like talk
Yeah.
about this stuff with. And so one of my friends who I went to acting school with ended up pivoting to the business side of Broadway, and he
Okay.
started a newsletter that really took off amongst the industry. It was like a more of an industry newsletter, like, what are the economics, like what's going on the business side. And so he ended up building an entire company out of it. He ended up,
Hmm.
starting a news site and starting, they track grosses on Broadway every week. So and they do a lot of like comparison and charts, and, they're trying to take a temperature check on the industry all the time. It's a constant thing. And so he built out well, I built out based on his specs, like the sort of preeminent like place to go check that at this point. And so yeah, and that was a nice merger of like, okay, this is like my arts background meeting my current tech background, and
Yeah.
that felt good. But it does, yeah. When you look, I need to like get all the freelance stuff off my site because it's barely relevant anymore. But yeah, I when you look at my site, you're like, oh, this guy's done a lot of like arts stuff, and I have, and that's yeah, it's an interesting. That community is not like super and they're not going to be listening to this. They're not super tech forward. They're not really like,
Sure.
nobody's. It's really hard to get people to use new systems or check new things, or that's why like the emails newsletter took off, because like they were like, I understand email. We've been doing that for
Mhm.
a while, and then he sort of branched it into like he's a very smart guy. He branched into a lot of different areas, but yeah, it's both a satisfying thing to work on because it's something I do care about, and my wife is a Broadway actor, so it's very, it's very in the realm of things that are
Mhm.
directly personal to me. But I don't. It can be kind of frustrating at times because it feels a little dinosaur esque. You know, it's a tough one.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's like that's the reality that most people don't talk about almost all, all business opportunities in like
Yep.
if you really want to go out and start a new something new. It's like there are just a million of these businesses that just are around. They have dinosaur technology. They don't want to change, but there's opportunity in that, right? Or there's,
Absolutely.
you know, the industry that we're in. It's as boring as you can get. Home inspections.
Right.
It's like, not that it's boring, but it's certainly not like sexy in the like Silicon Valley tech kind of mindset, right?
Right.
But just us building competent web apps that meet real needs for home inspectors like year over year
Hmm.
has took us from, just literally two guys in like a spare room to the biggest home inspection association in the world, like.
Right.
And it really was as simple as that. Like, we did a lot of other things, but I think most of it was just like people needed resources, and we
Yeah.
built resources that were easy to use and met those needs. And I can see how, the Broadway, or, you know I was talking with another friend, like ice cream shops, like anything, there's like these spaces where
Yeah.
it's just
There's room for
it's just
optimization. There's room
yeah.
for, greasing the wheels. And but again, it's you talk to people and they go, well, we don't want to spend more money on this part,
Yes,
or
yes.
it's, yeah, but we're really used to the way we're doing it. We've been doing it this way for 20 years. And I'm like,
Right.
so again, so I sort of would say, you've been doing it this way for 20 years. A lot's changed in 20 years, maybe. But I also understand that. I understand, when there's a system in place and it's working, and it's, don't fix what ain't broke, but still,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, but more importantly, my main question for you is, have you seen Hadestown? And if so, why was it so amazing? Because it's so incredible.
Have you seen Hadestown?
I have seen Hadestown. Yeah.
Okay. I have seen Hadestown. I liked it. It was not like my
Mm.
favorite show. That's maybe
Oh
my spicy take because I
no.
think I'm maybe the only one ever to say that.
Mm.
Yeah, I will leave it at that. I don't think anybody who cares is going to be listening to this, but yeah,
Interesting.
yeah, it's not. It wasn't.
Interesting.
It didn't hit for me. It didn't hit for me. There were parts of the show that were incredible, but it didn't fulfill me.
Yeah. No, I mean, I yeah. Like obviously this is not a Broadway podcast, so who cares? But like I feel like there were parts of it that were so incredible.
Yeah.
And overall I loved it, but I did feel like some of the parts were like surprisingly overwhelming for how prominent they were. I don't
Okay. Okay. The hype train on that show was moving at full speed. Like people were very, very, very into that show. So
yeah.
yeah, funny side story. When I was at Laracon last year, my wife was in a show called The Band's Visit, and it's a small show. Like not many people knew about it, but it won like a bunch of Tonys. So like you'd think, oh, people
Yeah.
would be like people just don't know about it. It's like when you say Band's Visit,
Huh.
nobody knows. But we were at Laracon last year, and I'm eating lunch with some guys, and this guy walks by at Laracon in a Band's Visit T-shirt, and I was like, I need to go talk to this gentleman right now.
That
And
is
I bombard.
incredible.
I mean, I think his name was Justin. Shout out Justin. I was like, I bombarded this man. I was like, hey, what's this T-shirt? What are you doing? What's your deal? What did you work on the site or what's going on here? And he was like, no, I just love the show. And I was like, my wife was in the show, and he just like lost his mind. And like we had like
That's
it was a great time. But it's
incredible.
you don't really get a lot of that intersection, and it's
Yeah.
so nice when you do.
That
So
is
shout out
awesome.
Justin. Fans visit. It's a great show. Let's check it out.
Yeah. I'm curious now. Yeah,
Yeah.
I had this like moment, I don't know, it's probably 10 years ago now, but my wife and I went to a play in Philly,
Mm,
and I feel like, I had gone to plays as like a high schooler for like a school trip, right? I had
sure.
seen Shakespeare like, as a 15-year-old where I'm just like, "Oh, this is so
Just glazed
boring."
over. Yeah.
Yeah. And so like as an adult, I went to this performance and just like walked out of it being like, "Wait, this is what theater is like?" Like
Yeah.
this was the most incredible thing.
Yeah. Tell
Why
your
am I
friends.
not doing
Everybody
this
go to
all the
theater.
time? Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
I really I try. I mean, we just like try to take friends and really hype it because it's just like, yeah, I think so many kids introductions to theater is just
Yeah.
like tedious at best or just
Yeah.
like, you know,
100%.
or worse. And so, yeah, it's really easy to write it off, but I've been so happy with like how much good theater there is in Philly, and like we come up. I don't come to New York a ton, but like we've kind of come up to see. I
Sure.
love musicals, so
Yeah.
we come up and see a musical from time to time,
That's awesome.
and
There's
it's
nothing like
great.
being in a room with a live performance. It just has a different energy to it. It's just a
Absolutely,
different
yeah.
vibe. So I highly recommend if you're not seeing theater, you should go check out theater.
Do
Everybody do
you
it.
do you pursue that stuff at all anymore, or have you like left it behind you?
No, no. The most I do is help my wife with her self tapes, which are like auditions that she needs to do at home. So that's the extent of my acting career at this
Live
point. It's been a long
vicariously through
time.
her.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And she's good. She's having a successful career, so I'm happy for her and good for her. But no, it wasn't. I tried it for a minute. It just wasn't. It's hard.
It's a
It's a
hard
hard road.
industry to be in. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's just like so much rejection just all the time, and if you're not up for that, and it's just judgment. You're just
Yeah.
constantly standing in front of people going like, "This is what I have to offer," and they're like maybe not even paying attention most of the time.
Right.
It's just
Right.
hard. It's hard. So I
Right.
realized like, oh, I think computers are my thing. I think that's where I live. Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah.
So
No, I
yeah,
get it.
good choice ultimately. But I like to keep my finger on the pulse at least a little bit, and see shows that my friends are in and go as much as I can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything else that you were interested in like touching on? We kind of veered off course for a while there, but I don't know. I kind of intentionally, or before this, I said like, don't do any prep because it's just like off the
Right,
cuff.
right,
But
right.
if there was anything that you had been thinking about, I want to make sure we get to it.
I think we covered it. I feel okay about this. How you feeling about it?
I It's been fun. Yeah, it's been great.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, I think we're good. I don't know. I'm good. I'm happy.
Well, I haven't done it in the past, but I've been meaning to get to or make sure to do like, where do people find you? Is there anything that you want to like hype since you're here? Let's get a little promo out of this if you want.
Sure. You can find me on Twitter mostly. That's where I am, Joe Tannenbaum. And I don't have a ton to hype. I'm hyped about India. I'm hyped about
Yeah.
India, so I'm looking forward to that. And hopefully there'll be a recording that we can shoot out. And
Upcoming
then
Laracast course.
upcoming Laracast course, TBD. I don't know what the date associated with it is. I'm just kind of churning out episodes now.
Do you have a
And
deadline that you're working towards, or I don't know
I
how
do,
much
but I
you can
I
talk
will
about it.
not say that on
Yeah,
mic because
yeah.
it makes me nervous. No, it's a very very reasonable deadline that I am working towards.
Nice.
Yeah, so I don't know when the actual course comes out though, so I have no information on that. But I am excited about it, and I hope that people enjoy it.
That's awesome. Have you looked at Mastodon? I tried to hype Mastodon a tiny bit at
Yeah,
New York. Is that a thing
I
that you've paid any
haven't.
attention to? Do you do have a Mastodon account?
I keep jumping on every once in a while, and it looks like everything that people are already doing on Twitter. So I'm kind of like, I don't need to keep track of this in two places. But should
Yeah.
I should I jump on the artisan? Is it artisan.dev?
Yeah.
Is that what it
Go
is?
for it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
I think I'm on there already. I just need to like actually like do it, like be more active on there. Is it
Yeah,
is it is it bumping over there?
I it's tough. I think that there's been a little bit of a decline of late.
Okay.
I think that there was a really meaningful spike, but I just think between like Threads
Yeah.
gaining some popularity and Blue Sky opening up and Twitter not fully imploding, like
Right.
some of
Continually not
the
fully
yeah
employing. Yeah.
some of the energy that had moved to Mastodon has kind of like dispersed. you
Is
know
that where you'd
i
rather be? Is that where you'd
i
rather live?
would, yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I think that I think that with Twitter and Reddit closing off from third party apps,
Yeah.
we kind of have learned this lesson. Even if, set aside what you think about like how Musk has been running Twitter, just the fact that this resource that we had has been closed off in a meaningful way
Yeah.
and continues to get closed off in different ways. you know, I think just like freaks me out because Twitter is like the one social network that I have stuck with and really enjoyed. I've been
Same.
really careful to carve out a space that feels good there. And,
But you do
you know,
have
in
to
a,
like be so careful because
you
like
do.
I'm
Yeah.
so conscious about like what I'm interacting with and who I'm interacting with in terms of like not like our community generally, but like anything outside because the
Yeah.
algorithm will be like, oh, you like that. Here's 100 more of those. And I'm like, I really didn't mean to. I just like accidentally watched this video. Please do not serve this. And
Yes.
it's a little panic inducing at times, but it's yeah, you have to be really hyper conscious about like exactly what you're doing on there.
You do. Yeah, and so
Yeah.
I really wish that there was a strong community of Laravel devs on something like Mastodon, because
Yeah.
then we own our future, right? Like, and I don't know, there are lots of other upsides. I think there are downsides. It's not as good as a centralized service in some ways, especially
Mhm.
around discoverability. I think that's a piece that they need to figure out. And moderation is tricky because it's basically down to the instance runners, the instance moderators. And
Right.
yeah, there are definitely growing pains. But ultimately, I wish that the Laravel community could move to like an open source, open system. And I'm trying to be involved in that as best I can. But it doesn't look, to be quite honest, it doesn't look like it's going to happen. Maybe
Yeah.
maybe something will happen on Twitter that pushes more people over. I have
You
found that
never know.
out outside of the Laravel world, like there certainly was a time when, I'd open Twitter and there'd be like 15 new posts, and I open Mastodon and there'd be like 150 new posts. Like
Mhm.
outside of the Laravel dev world, some of the other spaces that I like was interested in did move a little bit more full steam, and like there are really thriving communities on Mastodon that I really appreciate. So
Oh,
I
cool.
think you can do it. I think that the reality is, yeah, in the Laravel space, it's like 5 or 6 prominent people basically cross post to Twitter or Mastodon, Blue
Yeah.
Sky, Threads. And so it's like, I don't need to see the same post in 4 different places.
Right. Right.
But for other communities, I think it's really great. So
Yeah.
there's my pitch for
Okay.
Mastodon. By all means, yeah. And to anyone out there, I don't think I've talked about it on the podcast. Artisan.dev, RTSN.dev
Right.
is a small Mastodon instance that I run, and it's just a handful of people right now. It really is mostly for interacting with the broader Mastodon world. Like there's not a whole lot that happens on the like local instance, but if you go over there, there's a way to request an invite. It's invite only, and anyone who wants on, as long as you can prove that you're not going to be a total jerk, like
Yeah, yeah.
we'd love to have you
You're
there,
in.
right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Great.
So by all means, you should come on over and let's see if we
Yeah,
can't get a
I
few
should
other
get more active
people.
over there and
Yeah.
diversify my social networking.
Yeah. I mean, I think the other piece is even though it's smaller, it's still a big space. And I think for folks who do want to gain exposure, there's a huge opportunity there.
Yeah.
That's not
Yeah.
something that's as important for some, but for other folks who really do get a lot of freelance value out of exposure on social media, like
Totally.
there have been a couple of big social media companies that have looked at the like opportunity there, and it's real. It's like it's a much smaller pond, but like you can be a much bigger fish really quickly if you do the work.
Right.
So I think that's interesting for some too, and there's maybe an opportunity there. So again,
Cool.
rtsn.dev, check it out.
Check it out.
I co-opted your promo spot to pitch
Promo.
my
It's
own
your
thing.
podcast. Do it up.
All right. Well, thanks again for hanging out. This has been really fun, and I can't wait to check out your Laracast course, and I can't wait to see the video from India. It's bound to be a fun time, and
Thanks, man. I
yeah,
appreciate you having me on.
let's do this again sometime.
For sure.